Story time about how my boyfriend was cheating on me with my stepsister. So a little background information, my mom remarried whenever I was in 8th grade, and my stepdad had 2 daughters. One which was my age and we got along really well. Well, before my sisters and I went back to school, my mom wanted to go on a camping trip with everyone. And my boyfriend was coming because he was really close with my family. So while my stepsister and I are packing up, she starts acting really weird. And we're gonna call my boyfriend Kevin. She was like, "Oh, is Kevin still coming with us?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then she goes, "Oh, are you and Kevin still together?" And I'm like, "We were never broken up. Like, the fuck?" Like I said, she was just being super fucking weird. But anyways, we all get in the car, we drive up there, and her and Kevin start being super weird around each other. Like, they were being too touchy. Anytime that I wanted to go do something with Kevin, she would say, "Oh, Kevin, you can come do this instead." Well, that night, Kevin and I are sleeping in our tent. At least I thought he was. And I wake up to some loud noises in the other tent, like for part 2. Part 2. So like I said, I heard a bunch of noises and talking in my stepsister's tent, and I wake up and my boyfriend isn't in the tent. So I'd be very quiet getting out of my tent, and I go over to hers and I just listen. And oh bitch, I should have just confronted them because I got my motherfucking feelings hurt. He was telling her how he didn't love me at all and how he only wanted to be with her, and how every time that they kissed each other and screwed each other, he felt such a connection between them. So not only was he cheating physically, but they had a connection. Wonderful. So I open her tent and I confront them. This was the most degrading thing I've ever went through in my life. And I said, "I heard you guys outside. And I'm just not the type of girl who's going to come at another girl because my man wants her. Because at that point, he's not my man." She goes, "Sit down, sweetie. We need to talk." Apparently, they're in love. So they started dating. They're still dating. And my parents allowed it. So I distanced myself from all of them.
I was in class on Zoom. I wanted to go to sleep, honestly, because like when I'm tired, I go to sleep. I end up falling asleep and then class ends and everyone starts leaving the class except me, because I was like in a whole other universe at this point. I was dreaming, I was flying. At this point, me and the teacher are alone in the call. This is the best part. Then the teacher starts talking to me and he's like, "Samantha, wake up. Samantha, please. Samantha, you have another class." He woke me up, but I was half awake, so I didn't really know what was going on. So I thought it was my brother waking me up, and I straight up yelled. I was like, "Shut up, you fat booger." And so then I realized, oh shit, I just called my teacher a fat booger. And now he scheduled a parent conference. I'm going on Monday, so I'm really excited.
Extremely toxic best friend story time. So when I was in 8th grade, there was this boy. And this boy would go around telling almost every girl that he liked her. And I was one of those girls. And he would do stuff with all of us. And there were like 11 of us. So we all hated each other. Especially this one girl, and we're gonna call her Abby. And every time we saw each other, we would be super mean to each other. Well, a year passed, we stopped talking to this kid. And I bumped into her at homecoming and basically apologized. So after that, we became best friends. And everything was good until every time I told her about a guy, she would start talking to them. Like this one boy that I was Snapchatting and talking to, she accidentally sent nudes to him and said, "Oh, sorry, I meant to send them to my boyfriend." So then she called one of my other best friends and said, "No, it actually wasn't an accident." And of course he told me because he was my best friend. So I was like, whatever, and stopped talking to the boy. And she did it again, like for part 2. Extremely toxic best friend part 2. So pretty much her excuse for that was, "Oh, well, he said that he was gonna leak my nudes if I didn't send him them again." Which was a lie because literally half the school already had her nudes. So then I started talking to this other boy, and he lived like right down the street from her. So she was like, "If you want to go to his house, you can." And I was like, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Yeah, just go tell my mom." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went and told her mom where I was going and went over his house. So I walked back to her house and she literally locked me out. Like her mom had to come open the door for me to let me in. And she was like, "Oh, it's a good thing you came back when you did. Because I was going to drive you home now and tell your dad everything that you did." And she goes, "I don't think you guys should be together because you're inexperienced." And she would always tell me how he flirts with her all the time. So after our friendship ended, she goes, "I just felt like it was always a competition between me and you."
Okay, so story time. So basically one time in 5th grade, my dad took me to get breakfast from Dunkin' Donuts. We went there before school like always, and as we were there, this strange man outside was staring at me and like making faces. Super creepy. We didn't know him or anything, so we walked inside and I was kind of freaked out. I told my dad that I was creeped out by him and he told me that nothing bad was gonna happen. Or so he thought. So we got our foods and we ate it. Everything was fine, chill. After we were done, we got up to leave. The man was gone by now, so I felt better But then on the way to my school, I saw him walking on the sidewalk. Like, I figured he was going to his house or like somewhere else. When we got to my school, no one was outside. It was kind of weird. We went to open the door because my dad was a part of the PTA, so he came in with me. The door for some reason was locked. My music teacher out of nowhere ran out and brought us inside quickly. She told us that our whole school was on code red. Scary. And that a man was in our school, so we went inside and I went and hid in the music room. Like for part 2. Okay, so part 2. So I went and hid in the music room. Dad was in the PTA room, which was close by. Literally started crying because I was so scared and they weren't telling us anything because we were too young. I guess they didn't want to scare us. That didn't work. Once the code red was over, about 30 minutes later, we went to class. I went to go find my dad and make sure he was okay and see if he knew anything, and he didn't. When I got in my classroom, we were all talking about it, and my teacher said that the man just walked in and told them he was looking for one of his teachers from like 15 years back. Huh? They gave us a description of the man, and I realized it was the same man from Dunkin' Donuts. He just walked in my school. I was freaked out because I saw him at Dunkin' Donuts before school started, and I hoped I never saw him again. But a few weeks later, I saw him again multiple times at the same Dunkin' Donuts. He literally just stared at me all the time. So yeah, that's my little story.
Maybe. So I got revenge on my obsessive best friend for spreading rumors about me. So I put together an apology gift for her for bullying her, even though I did not. The gift that I put together was some makeup I got from Walgreens, but I decided to add some poison ivy to the eyeshadow so that she would get a rash. I then set up a hidden camera and watched as she put it on. And as expected, the rash started to form. After she noticed, I started to tell her off and accuse her of all the stuff she did to me. And she was so pissed that I managed to get a confession out of her. She was very much just like, yeah, I did that. Literally over me not wanting to spend every waking second with her. And the best part of it is that she threatened me on camera. So I cut out the part about the poison makeup and told her if she didn't tell all my friends, coaches, and significant other what she was doing, I would send the video to everyone. So she admitted to all of her crimes and I got back on the team. I got my friends back and my boyfriend apologized. I ended up totally fine and she ended up losing credibility with basically everyone. If any of you guys have a story you'd like me to share on my TikTok, follow my Instagram and I'll show you how.
Story time on how my parents sold me to my uncle. Okay, so boom, let's get straight into it. Ever since I was a kid, everyone would compliment me on how beautiful I was. Literally got complimented everywhere me and my family went. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, it's important. My parents didn't see me as their beautiful child. My parents seen me as dollar signs. I was literally up for sale and my parents were bidding on who would pay the most to marry me. My mom started teaching me how to cook and clean and how to keep a man happy. One day while my mom was getting me ready and all dolled up for dinner, I told my mom I didn't want to marry anyone and she flat out told me I didn't have a choice. Well, little did I know that exact night my mom and I was having this conversation, my uncle was downstairs waiting on me. Like for part 2. Part 2 on how my parents sold me to my uncle. Okay, so boom, like I said, my mom was getting me all dolled up for dinner and my uncle was downstairs waiting on me. I didn't know this at the time, of course. My mom and I go downstairs and I hear my dad say, "There she is. Isn't she beautiful?" Then I looked at a man who just smiled and said, "I like it." I asked my mom who was that guy and she told me, "Shh, that's your father's brother, sweetie, no more talking." So we all sat down and had dinner and my uncle was just staring at me, smiling at me and looking at me up and down. He was literally studying me. My dad even looked at him for validation. I was so confused. A little did I know this wasn't just a dinner. It was a tryout, an audition, if you will. If I would be good enough for my uncle. He was actually rich and looking for a wife and my dad was trying to sell me to him. Running out of time, like for part 3. Part 3 on how my parents sold me to my uncle. So like I said, we were having dinner and my dad was trying to sell me to my rich uncle. He was literally pitching a sale. She's beautiful, she cooks, she cleans, and she's very smart. And oh, she still has her V card. It was at that moment it hit me. I figured out what was going on. When my uncle left, my parents told me good job for being a good girl. I cried and told my parents I did not want to marry that man. I was 15 and he was like 40, but my parents told me I was going to marry him and I was going to like it. Well, fast forward a year later and they definitely sold me. And I lost my V card to my uncle on our wedding night. I hated it at first, but I kind of fell in love with him. And it didn't hurt that he was rich and I kind of lived stress-free. So yeah, my parents sold me and that sucks, but I ended up being okay with it. Lucky. And we all laugh about it now. Yeah, I know it's toxic and corrupt, but this is why it's an anonymous story.
Story time. My toxic best friend outed me to the entire school. So one day, one of my best friends from a neighboring school decided to move to my school, and she was extremely upset because her best friend over there came out as bi. So I ended up using this as an opportunity to come out bi as well. And she was like, well, it's okay for you. I just got really close to her. We'll call the girl Becky because no one likes a Becky. And we can call her friend Heather. So fast forward to after the situation had calmed down, we decided to all go prom dress shopping. So Heather and I were talking and we really hit it off. And I think Becky legitimately forgot about our sexuality because we were all talking about how much we have in common and we brought that up as well. She just looked at us and was like, oh, I forgot about that. And she just shrugged it off. But we continued to hang out for a few weeks. One of these weekends, we all went to church together and the sermon was about how God accepts you no matter what your sexuality is. But of course, Becky turns around to us and says that Heather and I could never date because it would F everything up. Later that day, Heather actually ended up admitting that she had feelings for me, and this is when Becky lost it. Stay tuned for part 2 and follow me on Instagram. Go look at the hot guys, but then turned around and got pissed at us for falling behind. And this is why she said she didn't want us to date, yet we weren't even dating. She said she felt like she was gonna have to choose between Heather and I because of the whole situation, and I guess she just picked me. Becky became extremely codependent and didn't want to leave my side. She was pissed if I spent time with anyone else and basically forced Heather out of my life. I ended up running into Heather and inviting her to my 18th birthday, and this is when Becky had her massive breakdown. At my birthday, she outed me to everyone at the party, my mom, and Heather's mom as well. My Insta is linked below for more content.
This is why skipping detention might be a good idea. When I was in high school, I slacked off a lot. My junior year, my math teacher was pretty upset by this. Once during a parent-teacher meeting, he told my mom that I wasn't doing as well as I could and called me lazy. My mom agreed and stated that she wouldn't blame him if he pushed and punished me to work harder. From this day on, he did exactly that, always questioning me before anyone else and always sat next to me during exercises. This is when my classmates started realizing that he was a little obsessed with me and started teasing me about it. Right before Christmas break, he threw us a surprise party with chocolates and mock champagne. He poured me an extra glass and congratulated me for doing better. I drank the first glass he gave me, but not the second because I'm diabetic and had already had too much chocolate. During the next class, I felt extremely sick and almost fainted. I spent the rest of the day in the nurse's office and chalked it up to eating too much candy. A few weeks later, I failed a math test. He became extremely angry and yelled at me in front of everyone. The look in his eyes chilled me and I cried. He gave me detention but scheduled it hours later than the usual time and said he would personally be there as well. When I showed up, it was getting dark already and I noticed I was the only student there. Something felt off and a feeling deep inside my gut was pushing me to skip. Right when I decided to skip, I look over and see him walking towards me. Part 2 of why skipping detention might be a good idea. As he walked towards me, I was getting nervous. I told him that I had an emergency and I had to go, but I would email the school and reschedule later. Right after this, I ran off. As I was running away, he yelled at me and told me that I had to obey him and come to detention or he'd call my parents. At this moment, I didn't care. The feeling in my gut kept growing, so I sprinted to the bus and went home. I was afraid that he'd call my parents, but my parents greeted me normally when I got home, so I assumed he didn't. The next day, I was expecting to get an earful, but he wasn't there, and as weeks passed, he never came back. Then a shrink came to our class and asked if he'd like to talk about our math teacher, but no one knew why. Fast forward a few years later when I became a teacher and started chatting with my coworker. I mentioned his name, speaking to her about my weird, bizarre teacher and how I skipped attention. That's when one of the oldest workers there went pale hearing his name. It turns out a few days after I skipped attention, my math teacher was arrested for downloading child you-know-what from the dark web. He also had tons of snuff videos doing terrible things to children and teens. Now I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't followed my gut instincts and stayed for detention that day with just me and him in that classroom.